All right. Welcome back, everybody. It's that time of the week. It's the Team Coaching Zone podcast live stream. We meet up every Friday to have these team coaching learning conversations with experts in the field, teams, and all kinds of guests. So today we have on the show the Team Coaching Studio. Back on the podcast, we've had the founder, Georgina Woodster, on a number of times, but this week we have some other team members and special guests. We have Allard Jong, dialing in from Brussels today, Emily Jones from the UK, and Bob Shearer from Germany, and my co-host, Melissa Sayer. Melissa, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing very well, Krister. I have this feeling of Friday, the Team Coaching Zone punctuates the end of my week. And as you can see, the sun is shining here. So all is well in my world.
Yep. And I think you're just back from some team coaching, Melissa. So maybe we'll get some update on you from that experience. I think in the UK, right, Melissa?
Yeah, I was in the UK. I was in the UK day before yesterday, and then I was working with a group of MBAs from Frankfurt yesterday.
So, okay. Yeah. All right. Interesting. Well, what's exciting about this show today is we have 5 people dialing in from 5 different countries, which is wonderful. A very European-centric call today, but which is wonderful. I'm holding it down in the U.S. outside of Philadelphia, between Philadelphia and New York. But Team Coaching Studio, great to have you guys on. Allard, I'm going to start with you because I think you and I connected first, and it was your thinking to bring on some of your colleagues. So why don't we start with a brief introduction to each of you, and then we can get to know a little bit more about the Team Coaching Studio and get into the episode today.
Well, I'm really happy to be here, Krister. As we said just before we went on the air, a bit starstruck. I've been following your work for years, and whether it's with the podcast or with 6 Conditions, and now it's my turn to be among your guests, and that's a huge honor and a real pleasure. So my name is Allard. I'm originally from Holland and have lived and worked in many different places. Now based in Brussels, Belgium. One of the directors over at the Team Coaching Studio, and kind of the lead for the international faculty group of the training portion of our operations, and yes, a practicing coach. I've been practicing coaching for about 20 years now, and really got involved more in the team side of the work I'd say about 6 years ago.
That's awesome. Well, great to have you, Allard, and thank you for your kind words. Let's go to Emily. Emily, you want to go next?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Krista. Kind of echo Allard. This is kind of what a lovely way to end a week. It's been a busy week, and I've been looking forward to this all week. So yeah, just kind of, Melissa, I'm with you with that kind of Friday, round it all up, have a great conversation, and ease into the weekend. So yeah, I'm Emily, Emily Jones. I've been working with Allard and Bob and others at the Team Coaching Studio for about 4 years now, and I'm a member of the faculty, so I deliver some of the programs, and I also lead the community of practice. So we have just over 1,000 team coaches across the globe who we connect with, and we have conversations on social media, etc. So I lead that, and also obviously a practicing team coach as well.
That's amazing.
Fabulous. We have a big interest in community practice. Our show last week actually was an intact community of practice. So maybe we can come back to that, Emily.
Yeah, great. Love to.
Awesome. And Bob.
I'm afraid not a lot else to add. There's a real pattern here. Like Allard, I've sort of lived and worked in a number of different countries over the last 30 years or so. My background is predominantly leadership development, and increasingly I found myself working with teams, and about 6 years ago took that a bit more seriously, and went through the very first diploma and certificate that Team Coaching Studio ran, which is a great experience. I'm a faculty member too, and help deliver some of the programs. I've got an interest in delivering programs to in-house audiences.
Internal. Yeah.
And what a lovely way to start the weekend eventually.
Exactly. The conventional wisdom is you shouldn't do podcasts on Monday and Fridays. Mondays and Fridays, according to the research, that actually people are more likely to listen on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. But the good news is the majority of listeners, we do have live listeners, but the majority listen asynchronously. So for those who aren't here, or if they're in parts of the world where this is just too late at night, they usually get a chance to download in the next couple of days. So all good stuff. But why don't we, great to hear that you guys are all faculty. I think all of us on the call actually do training of team coaches. So I'm sure we'll have lots to share about what we're learning about that. You know, it sounds like the team coaching studio has been really prolific with 1,000+ people you've been certifying. And I imagine some of that, I don't know if all that's virtual or if it's been a mix of in-person and virtual, and since the pandemic, how that's going. Would love to hear a little bit about that. But let's start with the team coaching studio. Folks could always go back and listen to the couple of episodes I did with Georgina, the founder of the team coaching studio. She's just lovely, a wonderful person. I'm a big fan. And she has a great book on team coaching that we'll reference here as well. But maybe we could have one of you just introduce the listeners who aren't familiar with the team coaching studio, what the studio is all about. And I'd love to ask you also, what do you think differentiates it from other programs or schools out there?
Shall I start, Emily and Bob, and you guys kind of just jump in and build? Yeah.
Go for it, Allard.
Okay. All right. So I think we're first and foremost, we're a training school, right? We're a training school, but really focused exclusively on team coaching, and really happy that we're the first team coaching training school in the world to be awarded both the AATC from the ICF, so that the specific accreditation for team coaching training from the ICF, as well as the highest level of accreditation of our programs from the Association for Coaching out of the UK. And so we're that, and Georgina started that, and I think Georgina has been getting this off the ground for the last 20 years, and so it was really one of the, as you know from the interviews with her, but one of the pioneers of this whole thinking around what team coaching is and what it isn't, and how do we teach it to other people, right? But I think we're more than that. We've become a platform not just to elevate the individual team coach, but really to try to elevate the field as a whole. And the way we do that is through a large community of people that share, like us, that share an interest in team coaching, with whom we run all kinds of community events. And what else do we do, Emily and Bob, besides training people?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, if I can come in there, so for me, the community, when I first joined the community and now as community lead, that's kind of the icing on the cake with the team coaching studio, because I think because it's still such an emerging field, I think the continued learning and growth that people can get through being part of that community and kind of posting questions and getting discussion points and having debate, I think really adds a richness to that continual learning and that sense of belonging. Because let's be honest, it's kind of a fairly new field, and it can be fairly lonely out there, particularly if you're not working with a business partner in the co-coaching space. Actually having a community where you can show up warts and all and ask the questions you want answers to can be really quite freeing sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of connects to the sense that we're sort of aspirationally trying to work with a virtuous circle where that community is also a tremendous resource for us. It's literally global, and we're just starting with our colleague Sebastian Fox's responsibility. He heads up the research part.
We had Sebastian on the show
a month or two ago.
There you go.
Great conversation about presence.
That was all the work he did around his master's degree, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, Seb heads up the research part of TCS, and we've just got the first sort of tranche of data, and that's something that we're viewing as something that will drive the profession, drive the thinking, because we're finding out what globally 1,000+ team coaches are experiencing. What their challenges are, what sort of work they're doing specifically with clients, what sort of challenges they're having, where they feel their skills need to be developed further. So we sort of aspirationally imagine that sort of community and the data that they generate will allow us to continually move the whole thing forward. It will sort of come back to our programs, and we'll need to adjust the content based on what they're telling us the issues are and what the challenges are and what skills they need. We're imagining it will challenge some of the competencies over time as well. New competencies introduced, old ones jettisoned because they're, time and experience proves perhaps they're not as relevant as we first thought they were. So there's this sense of a whole cycle that that community sort of offers and informs.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Emily, that it can be lonely work being out there as team coaches. And actually, I think a lot of team coaches tend to be solopreneurs or like work in partnerships, right? So being part of a community, I think, is critical for this work. But also, I think just interesting, like you have 1,000-person strong community, and I'm sure people are varying levels of involvement and activity, but that can be a pretty sizable force of people, right? If they're united and, thinking about how they influence the field. I'm curious about that. What do you guys think is the state of the field now? I mean, I got into team coaching around 2015, and it was kind of like whenever you talked about it, people would kind of look at you strange, and it wasn't a thing. But now I know there are internal team coaching groups and companies. It's really, it's taken off a bit. I think like anything, people are kind of pouring in. There's probably a risk of commoditizing team coaching and it getting watered down. That's probably inevitable. But I'm curious what you guys, what your thoughts are on the current state of the profession.
I think that people who are involved with team coaching today, but proper team coaching and as opposed to maybe training or most likely facilitation kind of work, I think we're still pioneering this, Krista. So, up until a few years ago, I think we used to say, well, team coaching is at the same place that coaching was at like 20 years ago, and maybe that's not exactly valid anymore. But we still we find ourselves having to do a lot of explaining, especially in corporations, and still have to do a lot of explaining of what team coaching is and what it isn't, and therefore spend a lot of time contracting, making sure that the contract around our role as an intervener is really clear, because there still is confusion about these different ways of working with teams. Bob, I know you've got this great analogy of which kind of brings together your love for working with teams and your love for eating great food, or cooking great food at least.
Let's stick with eating. That's the real passion. Are you talking about the sort of the favorite knife? Yeah. I kind of used that several years ago and continue to use it. It's just this idea that most professional chefs have a roll of knives, all beautifully kind of sharp and are designed for specific jobs. And I'm a passionate hobby cook, but I find myself, despite having one of these knife rolls with all these beautiful instruments in it, I've always got the same knife in my hand. And it's a really interesting metaphor that you can be drawn to what you feel most comfortable doing, and whether that's appropriate or relevant, often isn't a question that's posed. So I think team coaches can fall into that trap, that they end up often subconsciously using their favorite knife rather than the knife that might be most used for the team or the team leader or all of the above. Hopefully that makes sense.
But and so building on that, I think it's way too soon in the development of the field to say, okay, well, this is the right knife and everybody should be using this knife, and now we will only sell this knife. And this is kind of a detail, but but I remember when Georgina published the book, there was a lot of pressure from the publishers, as you can imagine, to subtitle it the comprehensive guide to unleashing the power in all, the comprehensive guide, because
Right.
no, but because that's the language that publishers love, and we really had to fight for keeping it a comprehensive guide, because it's too early, it's too soon, in all honesty, to say we've got or he or she has got the comprehensive guide.
Yeah. I think for me, Chris, to answer your question, it's a field that's still evolving. And I think there are people who use it. If we go back to that metaphor of a chef's knife roll, there are people using lots of different knives, and they're all called team coaching, which is confusing for the clients, regularly. So I think there's still a role for education, and it's a broad church, I think, at the moment.
Right.
What boundaries and parameters a team coaching studio putting around team coaching as part of the offering, and how you're inviting coaches into your training to think about team coaching? And I'm also then kind of nerdily curious about, do you pull the knife metaphor into the coaching, and then people are wondering and made to think about, are they right-handed, are they left-handed, and so I'm just kind of curious as to how you make that invitation into those that are going on your courses, and then how you evolve their learning journey a little bit, because it's that interesting thing, isn't it? Bob, you said, well, when I went on the team coaching studio program, it was in its first iteration, right? So like it's still an iterative process for you guys, because you're co-learning with your participants. So I'd just love to kind of understand a little bit more about that.
Shall I just kind of take this to start with, you two, and you can sort of chip in? I think it's probably, if I share sort of what's at the heart of our ethos around team coaching, that might explain it, Melissa, and kind of the different points that people join is probably around. So right at the heart of our ethos is almost a yin yang symbol, and that's use of self and presence. So I know a lot of people who sort of come on who join Team Coaching Studio, and we ask people, what do you want from the learning? It's well, I want a toolbox, I want some techniques, I want to learn some models, and we kind of try to strip all that out and start actually, well, it's about you, it's about your presence, and it's about how you use your presence. And yes, we add models in, and yes, we do techniques, but that's not at the heart of it at all. And we have this, we have this theory that it's absolutely about meeting the team where they're at. So if they need facilitation to begin with, then they need facilitation, and you're picking out that knife and you're using that. And if they need a little bit of skill building, then you might build a little bit of training, and you might use that knife. But you're as quickly as possible moving away from the directive bit and equipping the team to hold themselves through that use of self and presence. So you might hold them and be quite directive at the beginning, but the idea is that as soon as they're ready, you're moving backwards. So I don't know if that answers your question, because a lot of people come with it, like, where's the book with all the techniques? I want to learn how to do this, how to do this, and we kind of say, well, before we get that far, it's about you, and recognizing that we are all so different, and we're going to bring such different things to the room because of who we are, and that's our
I love
gift.
that. That's our flipping gift. It's kind of flipping up, I think, a lot of common practice upside down.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Where the being of the team coach or the signature presence or all these things oftentimes gets added on a little bit later once you've learned the fundamentals. But I like that idea of starting with who you are, because we all show up as who we are, and we all bring gifts, right? So that's cool. Nice.
Yeah, and we all bring the ability to, we all bring the ability to observe what's happening in a team, and to observe what's happening in ourselves as we interact with that team, and therefore we all bring with us the ability to get the team to share what's going on for them, and the ability for us to share what's going on for us, and And I think just with those very simple facts, you can go a long way, rather than with very complicated models and frameworks that may work on paper and may work in some, in some situations with some teams. But anybody who's worked with groups and with teams, knows that every team is different. And every time you think you know what's going to happen in a specific piece of work with the team, something different happens. And so the only thing you really have to fall back on is yourself.
Yeah. I think that's what draws us into it, though, isn't it? That it's, team coaching, it's context specific. So yeah, we can have all of these different things that maybe we have running in the background of the engine, but we enter into this context specific arena, and we just do not know what way that social system is going to start unfolding, unpacking, responding to whatever part of the team coaching journey they're on. I really like what you brought up there, though, Allard, around this whole idea of we have the ability to tap into ourselves and what's going on outside of ourselves. And I don't want to get too philosophical on a Friday afternoon, but I kind of feel that it's one of the biggest untapped unique human resources that we have at our disposal, that we have the ability to, tap into what's going on with each of us internally, and still at the same time be able to have a view as to what's going on in the outer world, which makes us quite different to a lot, pretty much every other species of the animal kingdom. And it just feels like such an untapped human resource, never mind developing that skill as a team coach. And I just wondered, how do you even go about creating the conditions for people to feel safe to navigate those two worlds in a much more honest and conscious leveled way?
I think that's a really powerful question, actually, and I think for me, when often sort of our customers come with a desire to be kind of filled up with models and tools and sort of stuff, there's for me a couple of kind of fairly consistent moments in our programs that you can almost hear that aha. And there's one where we show a continuum of the sort of work you might do with any team, and it starts at one end of the continuum with just this is one way direct input, this is training, this is instruction, all the way through sort of team building, facilitation, process facilitation, content facilitation, through to legitimate team coaching and beyond. And you ask the audience, where do you reside? Where do you spend most of your time? And is that because you're comfortable there, or is that because that's what the team needs? and that's normally a very powerful kind of moment where people realize there is a continuum, and they realize they probably do have a favorite spot to sit in. And there's another moment when we challenge and ask them, who's brought the content to the table? Are you driving that as the team coach, owning that, prescribing that, or is it coming from the team? And you can again hear people go, when the realization is that there's more to this than just stuff, models and slide decks. So yeah,
we also get sucked into that right when the clients ask a week or 2 weeks in advance to send the slides and the agenda. I'm never using slides. I try not to use anything projected if possible. I'm back to the old school flip chart and no tables and all that kind of stuff.
But that's such an interesting point, Christopher, because when that happens to somebody who's used to coaching individuals, should that question ever land on the lap of somebody who does individual coaching, they would
Right.
say, no, I don't have, and they would feel perfectly validated to say, I don't have an agenda, and I'm going to bring an agenda because we don't know what's going to happen. But yet, as soon as you start working with teams, there's a pressure that a lot of people feel to say, oh yeah, sure, yeah, I'll come up with something.
Yeah. And we need to get it out to the team a week in advance.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
all face those clients that are insistent, right? You might be saying, we're not going to send an agenda, but, you know, we're being fairly insistent here now that you need to send us one because, you know, you always get the kind of, because there's certain members on the team, no, they just wouldn't be able to come along if they didn't have this agenda. It's always blamed on the other team members. But I'm just curious, like, how do you stand, you know, is it your policy to stand firm? Do you not stand firm? You know, is that them? Like, I know I'm being really playful but is that them owning the content where they're saying they have the agenda? Is it us? I'm just curious.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we have a saying that we say an awful lot in Team Coaching Studio, which is always be contracting. ABC, always be contracting. So you know, I think you may have a conversation with a sponsor or a team leader, and they want to send something out to the team. They want to get the team on side. They want to get the team motivated and committed to if it's a day or whatever it is that you might be delivering in inverted commas. And there's kind of almost like the minimum that you can give to make that okay, and to make that team leader or sponsor feel that this is something that they want to do and that the team are buying into. And then in the room, you contract around. This is what we've done before. This is perhaps if we've had conversations with the team one-to-one, done a kind of discovery piece around this is what came out with that. So let's contract in the room with the team around what you want to get out of the day. And we have some ideas, or I have some ideas based on conversations previously, and they may change. So it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because the bottom line is you want to get in and you want to support the team.
It's a dance.
But you want to be as responsive to the team as possible as to what comes up in the room, recognizing that the contract and the client is the team as an entity, not the individuals in the room.
Right.
And that's always a tricky balance, I think, particularly when you first start working with a team.
Yeah. Whenever I start a team coaching session, or if it's the first time with a team, one of the things I'll say is plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. So I just do that as a qualifying statement to just say, I'm going to give myself permission to for us to go off the plan. And I oftentimes will also add on and say, you know, if we're actually cooking with gas, we're not going to need this plan after about 45 minutes or an hour, and it'll go out the window, and that'll be fine. Right. If that happens.
Because I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I'm absolutely convinced that we don't know what the work is going to be until we start doing the work with teams. But Melissa, just a few minutes ago, before her screen went blank, but Melissa talked about psychological safety, and I know, so small parentheses, Sebastian Fox, who we mentioned and who you had on, is doing a lot of work, not so much in psychological safety, but kind of taking it to a new place, which he calls safe. He prefers to talk about safe spaces. And he'll be coming out, I think, with some really exciting work third quarter of this year around that notion of safe spaces and what makes it. But whenever you talk about a safe space, you're talking about a container, right, in which the work takes place. And it's that container that kind of configures what's possible and how far the team is going to go. But no matter how you look at it, there's certain behaviors that we engage in with the team and that we can teach the team. There's certain behaviors that will build that container or strengthen that container or amplify that container. And then that container, in turn, will make it possible to engage in those behaviors. So it really is kind of a virtuous kind of circle. But I am absolutely convinced that giving the team some structure in the work that we do with them can help build the container. So structuring things is probably one of those behaviors that helps create a safe space, at least in the beginning.
No, I think it's these polarities in yin and yang. Like if you have too much structure, then you kind of choke off, really what maybe needs to occur, or you're not allowing what needs to come to the surface. And if you don't have any structure, on the other hand, the other extreme, it creates a lot of anxiety, right? So it is always kind of a dance. And I think once the team gets into flow, structure has served its purpose. And that's when, you can kind of create the agenda as you move along, but you do need a starting place.
Hey, Krista, I forgot. Have you ever had Bennett Brett on for one of your?
No, never heard of Bennett. Yeah.
What's the title of his book, guys? The team discovered, I think.
I think so.
It's subtitled Dialogic Team Coaching. And so Bennett Brett, I mean, wonderful team coach and teacher of team coaching. He talks about minimum viable structure, and I really like that. Minimum viable structure. What's the minimum structure that this team needs to get going? Yeah. And then, of course, I think for a lot of us, our favorite way of working with a team is free flow. You mentioned the word, the total emergent kind of space where, and those are some of the best moments I've had, where you literally invite the team to have a conversation about what? Well, about anything really. Just have a conversation together, and you are there in the service of, back to John Whitmore, right? You're there in the service of raising awareness and raising ownership.
Yeah.
And you do that by contracting for a certain way, maybe, and a certain frequency of interventions that you offer up to the team. But then it really doesn't matter so much what they talk about, because it's all about how they talk together.
Interesting.
Interesting you say that. The group that I was
Melissa, you're back. I thought you were gone.
Well, I was momentarily gone. Krista mentioned at the start of the podcast about the research on for not podcasting on Mondays and Fridays, and I have to say, I do seem to have with much more frequency than any other day in the week these little internet drops. So maybe I'll have to take that research a little bit more seriously, Krista. But I really like that the piece around the process. It's not what they're talking about; it's how they're kind of talking with each other, and then you can get to developing the conversations in service of something that the team might need to achieve. I was working with a group yesterday, I mentioned, and I had like a simulated case where they all took on the role of a functional leader in this hypothetical organization that I'd set up for the afternoon. And of course, it was a room full of MBAs. So all they wanted to really focus on at the start was, but what was the answer? What was the answer to the challenge that you set us as a team? I was like, no, we're not starting there. Let's talk about the process that you experienced of coming together as a team. And then just fascinating to see different processes emerging by again, back to that whole idea of context, right? I think I had 6 teams physically in the room, and then 2 teams working virtually that couldn't make the trip. And it was a real test of the context sensitive nature of what goes on in teams by virtue of the configurations of people that you put together. So I really like that kind of thinking around helping teams almost see their own process.
Yeah. But because really that's where the learning is. It's in how they do things, and if they can become more aware and more responsible for those processes, which we don't achieve when we facilitate them. Because when we facilitate them, we hold
the content.
Exactly. Yeah. We manage the process, right? To make it easy for them, to make it facile, to make it easy for them to get to that. But so that's a big shift. And then those processes more often than not, Krista, like you mentioned polarities earlier. I think those processes are more often than not observable in the form of polarities, really.
Where
they, No, because just as an example, you can ask a team, so, to summarize a conversation, and they'll say, well, we had this idea, we had that idea, and we had 5 really good ideas, and these were the 5 ideas we had. But another way to summarize the conversation at a process level would be to say, I noticed that that you open up a lot of ideas.
Mm.
So there's a lot of inventiveness and there's a lot of energy there, a lot of creative energy. But on the other side of the polarity, you don't really land anything.
Mm.
And that's a process observation, which I think may be more useful for them in the long run than the content observations.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I was going to say, I was saying to somebody yesterday this quote that the way a person does anything is the way they do everything. And I think this applies also for teams. And so I've heard you guys mention observation a couple of times. So, I do think this is very powerful, probably underutilized, that team coaches tend to facilitate more or tend to be more directive in the coaching rather than coming in and being a fly on the wall and observing, sometimes with intervention or without intervention. And I'm curious about that because I do feel like when you see a team in action around doing work, the story gets revealed, right? I used to do when I used to do executive coaching. I don't do it so much anymore. I would always try to contract with the leader, not only to do like 360 feedback interviews, but also if I could shadow them for a day. And a lot of leaders thought it was a little bit weird, but then they would agree. And then sometimes they were proud, like walking around the office and I'd be like along and they would introduce me as their coach. And you could see people would be like, oh, wow, I want to get a coach, but it was, seeing the leader in context, in action, there's nothing like shadowing a leader for a day or a half a day, because everything else you did, assessments, what you heard them talk about, the 360 interviews really took on a whole nother level of life. And I kind of feel like as team coaches, if we don't get to see the team in action, we're kind of missing a big slice of a whole dimension of reality right around that team and its existence.
Yeah. And it's only, I think, when you see them in action, you realize what the real, what's underlying, what's under the surface. We have this adage, don't we, in executive coaching, that the presenting issue is very rarely the real issue. I think that's absolutely the same with teams. And if you stick to facilitation and you're concentrating on the content, you never get to see under that line and under that surface to say, well, what is the real issue here? What's the real nub of this, that if the team were aware of it and could work with it, could actually make a really sustainable difference in their work.
I want to go back just for a moment around your approach to training coaches, and then I want to kind of toggle over a little bit to chat about, does Team Coaching Studio, do you contract through, work with clients through the Team Coaching Studio, or do you do that on your own? But back to the team coach training. So it sounds like a big thing that's differentiator is around the presence of the coach and how they're showing up and the being of the coach. I'm curious if there's anything else. And I think I also heard that you kind of help them work on process and content, a continuum of ways you can show up in terms of training, facilitation, process observation, and the like. Anything else that you think stands out? There may be listeners who are interested in learning from the Team Coaching Studio. So I'm curious if there's anything else that you think kind of are the key features or elements to the approach that would be helpful for the listeners.
I think for me, the first thing that jumped into my mind listening to your question, Krista, was that one of our philosophies is that at the end of the program, whether it's a certificate or a diploma, that's not it. And I think again, sometimes we'll have people that come on our programs that believe that once they've got the piece of paper, that's all they needed, and they can sail off into the sunset as a highly competent team coach. So I think there are plenty of way markers through our experience, our learner experience, that kind of tries to debunk that. But I think we're increasingly proud of the stuff that we can offer, and that the alumni themselves are busy generating, that continues to hone capability, and whether that's skill, whether it's refining your philosophies, or really getting clear about your particular stance and where you want to work as a team coach.
That's where the community of practice comes in.
Yeah. So I would argue that's actually where the real work happens. It's after the programs, and when people sort of reconnect in our sort of community of practice, and continue to challenge each other and share real experiences, and that sort of lurches into bits of supervision, and then things that we do to enhance specific skills or to explore a new idea or a new concept. So
I think this work is too challenging to go it alone, that you need to be in supervision and or a community of practice, because I think it's just it's so rewarding, but it can be very challenging work, right? Some of the teams can be in really complex systems, and it's hard to make sense out of that alone.
And so it's good to see professional bodies like the ICF shift a bit of their focus from requiring mentoring to requiring supervision. Which we completely stand behind. So no, just back to that question about how we intervene with teams. How can we be a good fly on the wall, so to speak? Or I think it was Ruth who said how to be a good. How did she put it? Something around Ruth, if she's listening to this, but to a benevolent ghost in the room who cuts through the crap.
Okay.
I think I
like
saw.
That.
I think
I've never heard her say that, but that's a good one. Yeah.
I thought that was I don't know. Anyway, maybe it's not Ruth. This is not you. Then sorry, but how to be a good benevolent ghost in the room? I think so. It has to do. So Emily and Bob touched upon these things like it's a lot of it has to do with our presence and then our use of self. And I would say the third part of that holy trinity would be active experimentation. And what I mean by that is not pre-planned exercises that we bring to a team session. So not something along the lines of, we're going to divide the group in two and see who builds the highest tower and blah blah blah, and see what we learn from that. That's fun, but more about whenever we see that the team is learning something about itself, helping the team design an experiment to put that into action. Okay. So that example earlier of, I've noticed that you guys, open up a lot of different avenues of thinking, but you never really land anything. How about for the next 10 minutes, we try to come to a consensus about the one thing that we're going to take forward, but let's do that here and now. So that working here and now, I think with teams is a big part of our methodology too, because a lot of the conversations with individuals, and especially with teams, a lot of the conversations tend to be about there and then rather than here and now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
How do you train your coaching students, team coaching students around, the process piece or the observational skills piece? Like at 6 team conditions, we would look very specifically at process losses and process gains and those types of things. But it gets back to that whole question of, do you give them a methodology for doing that or a framework for doing that? Or do they, does it kind of, do they take a more gestalt approach to what it is they're knowing, or a combination of the two?
A word that comes up, I think, a lot when you hear us in the different training sessions that we run is the word patterns. So what are some of the recurring patterns that you observe in a team that they may not be seeing themselves? And a pattern, you could define it in many different ways, but for the sake of simplicity, a pattern is something that in an hour-long conversation you see happen more than 3 times, for example. Yeah.
I really like that. Because that's another part of what we have to learn, isn't it? The judgment of knowing, when to step in, when to step out, what's potentially going to be useful to the team, what's just, something, as you say, that you have a preference for. I was working with that team in the UK during the week, and part of the work we did was there was something they were working on, and I said, okay, well, set it up as a meeting, and I will kind of move my chair back and observe. And it was like a game of, that old style pinball, where like you'd kind of release the balls and it would start going in these different directions, but it had a pattern to it. You needed to kind of observe that the pattern was moving in the same way at least 2 or 3 times for it to kind of be relevant. And then there's a skill about how do you bring that pattern into the room in a way that team members hear it and work with it and not feel judged by it or critiqued by it, because it's just a moment in time, right?
I think you always bring it in with a bit of a question mark in your voice at the end of whatever it is that you bring in. Holding it really lightly and offering it rather than imposing it. And I think I think another important point to keep in mind is that whatever. This is a real optimistic point of view, isn't it? That people are doing the best they can in any given moment.
Oh,
yeah. So
it needs to be a guiding principle, right?
Yeah. So they're getting some benefit from engaging in this particular whatever pattern it is. Getting some benefit from it, and maybe first acknowledge that. So start with the positive and say, wow, I really acknowledge, I just want to really take a moment here to acknowledge the passion in this team. Because they're all, like they keep interrupting each other, for example, right? So I really want to, acknowledge the level of energy and passion that's available in this team, and then let them run with that a little bit longer, and then maybe help them see what the cost of that might be. But start with the positive. Start with accentuating the positive.
And there's also something, Allard, about making sure that you're not analysing that pattern, that any analysis of that pattern comes from the team.
I love that.
Yeah.
You don't want to show up like I call it the lab coat syndrome, with the white coat and what do you have, like a clipboard in your hand and go, I've now observed that. I don't believe in that. I think that can be really off-putting. Where it's like all of the professional bodies somewhere will have that word partnership in their definition or their thinking of coaching. It's a partnership.
Yeah, for sure.
And if I show up with my lab coat and my clipboard, then I'm one up.
Yeah. And then your presence is impacting the dynamic, right? It's the observer effect on the on what's going on. Yeah. I'd love to talk a little bit about it. It looks like on your website you have programs, and I put that link up a bit before. If people wanted to learn about the different training programs you have, and it looks like you also have some corporate solutions. I wonder if you guys could speak a little bit about that. And I want to move that conversation also into like what's new, what's exciting, what are you seeing in the clients? And I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, so we might have to mute for a sec for those whoever's not speaking. Yeah. So I don't know. Would one of you guys want to talk a little bit about the corporate solutions, and then we could talk a little bit about like what's new and exciting, and right, what are you guys passionate about? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm just all of a sudden really self-conscious about the feedback. If it's me, let me know.
Okay, I think it's okay now. Yeah.
All right. Okay, but so Krista, Melissa, I think this is. It's kind of happening organically, and I think it's part of this increasing this wave of interest around team coaching that is happening right now, and so. We get phone calls of course we get phone calls from organizations saying, we've got this or that particular team, and we want to get some coaching for them, and they somehow find their way to us, and we follow up with them. And then the other part of the corporate work is I'm just amazed. I didn't know how many organizations actually have huge pools of in-house team coaches. It just really I don't know if there's any research around that, but how many of the Fortune 500s or have that, and so they're starting to call, and this is really interesting because inside those big organizations there is an increasing need for those in-house coaches to work with teams more than with individuals. So that shift from working with one person at a time to working more systemically is happening in organizations.
Yeah,
and so they want some upskilling, and I know Bob, that has always been an area of interest of Bob. How do we that notion of the leader as team coach? So that's exciting.
Yeah. I was just struggling to come off mute there. Yeah, that's that is an area of personal interest, and there's an argument there around who who's best placed to help a team evolve? Is it an internal team coach? Is it an external team coach, or is it their leader? So yeah, I think there's a very long conversation, ideally with a couple of glasses of red wine, actually, just to make it more interesting, around the role of the leader in that process. Yeah.
But
it's
no, and Krista,
Well,
and Melissa, if going, so I don't know, I'm not an expert in the 6 conditions, but I know that team coaching is one of the 6 conditions, right? And my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that does not have to be provided by an external team coach. That as long as there's it's team coaching, not a team, that particular team coach, right?
Really agnostic, like once it's happening, and relevant to what it is that the team is trying to achieve. So there's almost a piece around and who best can serve this team and coach this team, given where they are in a project, given where they are on a task, or those types of things. And one of the things that we've been, Krista, myself, and Ruth have been talking a lot about as well is, when team coaching engagements come to an end, what skills have we left the team with to be able to take forward the team coaching past our intervention, and just it's always something that we've kind of thought about. It's always something that we think about, but increasingly we're becoming way more considered and intentional as to how we can ensure that happens.
Yeah, that
Number
legacy
of years,
piece. Sorry, Krista.
Oh yeah, no problem. I was gonna say, a number of years back, I did a project with colleague David Tate, Dr. David Tate, who's been on the show, but we worked with 13 teams in a private equity portfolio. And so every team was completely different, like the industries. They were like tech and healthcare. And we actually had all the CEOs together at the end. We did like the top team assessments for all the teams and debriefs and one-on-ones with the CEOs, but all the CEOs were brought together for a half day. And we kind of looked at across the whole portfolio, including the senior team of the private equity firm itself, to look at what trends could we identify across teams that were just revealing, even though they're totally different industries and different stages of development. And there were a number of interesting patterns, but the one that kind of got triggered for me was around the role of the CEO and their team coaching. And they were super interested in this because almost all of them, without fail, their idea of coaching and leading was primarily leading through one-on-ones. So their method was to have one-on-ones with each direct report, each of their leaders. And they would be very frustrated that those leaders were always coming to them, the CEO, instead of each other with issues. And, when we would kind of hold the mirror up and say, well, tell us a little bit about how you're working, what we would discover is, well, what did you expect? It's kind of like, what did you expect? If you're doing one-on-ones, you're not fostering connections between the members themselves. And that was like big light bulb. And they were very intrigued around, so what does it mean to then coach a team as a leader? And I think that's very revealing. It suggests to me that most leaders, have never really seen much of that done in terms of modeling. But also there's very little training and development. So how could we expect leaders to act differently? But I, for many of them, it's a huge light bulb moment when they say, oh, I don't have to do one-on-ones with my members every week. That sucks up a huge amount of time. Maybe I could do that every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks and have a team session where I'm coaching them as a whole. So anyways, I do think the team leader piece is a real emerging area. And it's been, I wouldn't say it's been a blind spot in the team coaching profession, but we haven't really thought about that. We're just never going to reach all the teams out there with external team coaches or internal team coaches, and team leaders are the natural, coaches. And then you start to look at self-managing teams. Then, we start to get into that as a capability, which I think is really exciting. And I think that's a huge opportunity area for the whole profession, is to push more into that. Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And for team coaches not to feel threatened by that, because my view is it's a blue ocean out there of teams. There's just hundreds of millions of teams. We're never going to reach all of them. So don't be afraid to, help teams learn how to coach themselves, or leaders to get better at coaching their own teams. I have had leaders where the team never has met me. I'm behind the scenes doing one-on-one coaching with the leader, and leaders learning things to do with their team and then goes and does it themselves without me there, which
Yeah,
has been
I just worked with a leader who was co-leading with another leader, and they were bringing their two teams together as a kind of a cross collaboration piece, recognizing their interdependencies.
Yeah.
And when they wanted me to go, which was yesterday, I was double, I was working with this other group. So I said, well, let's just have a coaching session where we put it together and we step it through, we design the agenda, and just go off and do it yourself. Give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? And I think increasingly more and more, that's kind of the direction we need to be traveling in.
And Melissa, what you just said there, I think is something that I find really fascinating and exciting, because kind of talking about what's next. I think you said that earlier, Krista. It's like what's next with the team coaching. It's that, this is coming on board more and more, and my hypothesis is that the pandemic really focused organizations on the teams, because they had to pull it out the bag really quickly, and with pace, without the full picture, and teams became absolutely critical to business survival at that point. And I think that's continued. That's just my hypothesis. I've not based on any research, but
every meeting with companies and here talking to folks a lot, a big issue now is the reduction in headcount because of the economy. There's been a lot of, and that's putting a lot of pressure on the people who have survived and the teams who have survived to do more with less. I mean, I hear that expression almost every week. We need to do more with less. The morale is, has been wiped out because a lot of people have been, lost their jobs. And so it's putting more pressure on teams, right? As well as the individuals. But I do think this
on teams. And I wonder, where does our role end though, Krista, in terms of, pushback? Because essentially the message that I'm hearing there is, and so be it if that has mental health consequences for people doing more with less, and this like increasing pressure. And we talk about earlier in the conversation, I can't remember which one of the three of you said it, but I totally agree. Like we're all the best that we can be now, and it's we've all still so much to learn about team coaching, and one of the things that I want to increasingly learn is around those, where's the pushback here around some of the things that, just really
unhealthy practices
are unhealthy. It's like, kind of devoid of humanity sometimes.
I mean, my reaction to that.
On that depressing note.
It is.
No, but I was just to make a quick follow up on that is I am speaking with a client who they basically like destroyed a whole division in a reorg and let go of a lot of people. And now they're having to really perform and deliver, but the people are totally demoralized and they want to know, like, can you just come in and fix that? And it's kind of like create a bunch of damage and then hire some team coaches to come in and try to help pick up the pieces. And that's a problem. That might be where we have to, as an ethical choice of when do we draw the line?
And this goes back, I think, to the chef's knives. I mean, team coaching is one knife, and then we're noticing that there's a real demand from people to understand more about how to work with conflict in teams, and so there's almost a bit of mediation. But that's another knife, and but we can talk about that knife and become semi-proficient in using it. And another knife is the whole field of professional dialogue with a capital D. And so we've been doing a lot of work with Peter Garrett and Jane Bull from Dialogue Associates, which you have to have on at one point or another. And fascinating work, how to go from working intra-team with one intact team to how to bring several teams together, and that then is, I don't think that's team coaching anymore, but through dialogue we can bring a lot more people in the room.
Absolutely. So I'm hearing, to summarize so far, working with upskilling internal team coaches, you're seeing that as a trend. There's the theme around team leaders. And the role of team leaders in the work, conflict resolution, multiple teams, multi-teams, and dialogue methods. These are some great areas. Anything else, or any of those you guys want to touch in here in the last minutes of our conversation? I'm mindful of the time. I want to be respectful of
No, I noticed
over.
another big demand. I think that's at least from the people that that we work with, is a better understanding around how to work with power and authority in teams.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Say more about that. Yeah.
Well, just because power and authority are present in any team, whether that's a top-down kind of power or if it's a distributed kind of power, but and those power dynamics are often unspoken. They're very often implicit, and as team coaches, we have our own, or as coaches, as humans, we have our own relationship with power, and we go in there with our own kind of biases around power, but it's how do we meet the power structures that are there, and how do we take those into account in the way we contract and work with teams?
I love you said that, because I do think every team has an authority structure and a power structure, and like you said, it's rarely ever spoken or made explicit or examined. I also think authority has gotten a bad rap as well. It's hard to be in a position of authority. We project onto people in authority lots of good and bad, right? We have these idealistic hopes of being saved, and then we're also resentful of the fact that we are dependent on the authority, right? But I agree with you. I think that's honestly, 9 times out of 10, I think when teams fall apart or where there's big issues, it's almost always, for me, it tends to just default back to the authority issues. Team leaders are not welcome in. They're like, they're given a honeymoon and then they're just taken down by their own teams. I mean, there's a dark side to that really can come out consciously or unconsciously. I don't think it's always conscious, but it does speak to these deep psychological dynamics in groups. Yeah.
Look, one of the things this last thing I'll say, but one of the things that we do as a platform, as an organization, is that we put on a yearly retreat, not a conference, but a retreat. So if anybody's in England in the month of July, come say hello, because the theme of this year's retreat is all about power. And we're going to look at it from different ways with models, and we're also going to play with power. We're bringing in some people from an improv school. We're going to do improv theater around power. I really look forward to that.
That scares me immensely, Allard. I have to say, that whole improv.
Push your edges a little bit,
Melanie. I'm up for it, but I'm like, ooh.
But we have to.
Melissa and Bob are going to jump in before on the power and authority. But go ahead, Allard. Yeah.
No, thinking on our feet. It's a huge. I think it's a huge skill to have.
Absolutely.
And working with what emerges.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Come say hello.
Yeah. Melissa and Bob, were you guys going to jump in on the power and authority? It looks like I saw your body language jumped on that,
Well, I'd kind of come at it from a slightly different perspective, in as much as I've spent an awful lot of my working life in Asia Pacific, where power and authority has another sort of perspective, which is a cultural one. So it's just really interesting how that shows up in a room and in a team. So that's just all I'm doing.
Can you describe that, or is there an anecdote there or anything that comes to mind?
Oh, well, I mean, lots of anecdotes, but I mean, the fundamental premise is that the power sits with the most senior person, and they need to be revered and given preferential treatment, whether they're competent or not. I mean, the anecdote I always offer was the report that was written, the official report that was written on the back of the Fukushima nuclear power plant meltdown. And the preface, the sort of exec summary on the front of that said this accident could not have happened anywhere else other than in Japan because of Japanese culture. And that there's a dreadful kind of series of events that kind of described how people with no technical ability whatsoever, and this included politicians and CEOs, were telling technicians in the plant to do things that were inappropriate, but there was no pushback.
So authority structure,
yeah. So I mean that's a pretty apocryphal example where it could have been. I mean, it was serious, but it could have been even more serious. But just this resistance to push back the power and authority if it resides in somebody that's more senior than you. So it's an extra level of difficulty to navigate.
I really appreciate that because, if you think about the million years of evolution as a species, we have deeply ingrained psychological adaptations about power and authority. Yet in the last 20 years alone, with the rise of mobile phones and like the speed of information, we are decentralizing authority a lot through new information. Yet I think our psychology can't adapt. I mean, it adapts quickly, but that, millions of years against 20 years, like it's asking a lot. So I think you guys are onto something there around really, if you can really dig into authority and power and use the energy around that, because it's just latent with all kinds of energy, which can be oftentimes goes more negative than positive. But if we could really harness that, we could really unleash the leadership in groups and benefit from authority, because we need authority, right? It's there for a reason. It serves a purpose, but can also become a major obstacle. Yeah. Emily and Bob, anything else just to round out kind of trends? I mean, I think you guys have some juicy ones. I mean, we could have had a whole episode just on power and authority, which maybe is a topic for the future. Maybe after your retreat, you guys should you guys come back, or some others from the team coaching studio, and help us understand what came out of the retreat. But Emily and Bob, anything else come to mind?
I think the only other thing that was kind of a hot spot with the research that we did last year was, and it's no surprise at all, that teams are clearly struggling with sort of transformation and change.
Yeah.
So I mean that won't surprise anybody on the panel or that might be listening. It's the statement of the obvious.
Yeah, and the other thing, Krista, you've said it already. The having to do more with less, and Melissa, your point around team resilience and the danger of sort of team breakdown, team burnout. Looking at that as at a team level rather than an individual level, I think is really important at the moment.
Yeah, I think so. It's certainly important work, and I think also where we can be in service of that with teams is back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of our capacity and our skills to help teams see their own process. And I think that's one way that we can definitely equip teams with more resilience, and also even with a recognition of, I like what you're saying there, Krista, that authority has got a bad rep, and helping teams recognize, well, is there a different word that you want to use for that exact thing that's needed in this team in order for the team to be successful. So sometimes it's just helping teams, reframe some of the language and the mental maps that they're holding about things that might be causing tensions in the team. It's been such an enjoyable conversation.
Yeah, it's always like you start really heating up towards the end, but I guess that's good. We leave a little bit of appetite for future conversations. But Allard and Emily and Bob, it's been great to have you guys on. We're going to give you guys the last word here, just being mindful of our time today. Anything else you want to share here with the listeners before we punctuate this episode and let you guys get off to your weekends and all that? So I don't know who wants to go first. But again, pleasure having you guys on. Folks can head over to the Team Coaching Studio, check out what's going on over there. I'll pop up the link. It's teamcoachingstudio.com. Lots of great stuff in there. But yeah, we'll let you guys have the final word here today. So
no pressure.
I would. So thank you so much, Krista. Thank you, Melissa. I know you've had a full week. That I'm convinced, and I think my colleagues are too, I know Georgina is, that the future of coaching is team coaching. The future of team. So anybody listening to this, whether they're a team leader or whether they're a coach, in-house or external, get on board, make sure that you know what you're doing, and get some training. It doesn't have to be with us, but get some training, because this wave is just growing and growing, and it's not going to go away.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah, I might just sort of jump on that, Alan, just say the next time you're doing this sort of work, think about which knife you're holding and why you've chosen that one. There you go.
I love that, because it's a little bit like you need to have some responsibility, because knives can cut, they can do all kinds of good things, but you can also hopefully prevent from doing some damage, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think I'll close just for people who are listening who are interested in team coaching and maybe haven't quite started exploring it yet is it feels like a real privilege to partner teams in their thinking. And every time I work with a team, I feel really privileged to kind of to be invited into that inner space to help them think differently and to help them grow and learn. And just the impact that can have on not just teams, but the organizations they work with, and then the society that the organizations operate in, that the ripple effect with team coaching, I think, can be huge. And it feels a real privilege to be working in that space.
I think you're right. People spend the majority of their time in their families and in their work relationships and places. And so if we can improve those places, then the impacts can be really far and reaching. Awesome. Melissa, anything to say in closing here? Are you good?
No, I'm going to honor giving our guests the final word.
Well
so
said.
Thank you very much. Very enjoyable conversation. Look forward to keeping the conversation outside and beyond the podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you
care.
guys. Have a
Thanks
great weekend.
very much. And
Have a great
you.
weekend.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.